Hello everybody, this is your professor from your Java programming class. Today in this video, I want to go over arrays, and what I plan to do in this video is to go over the basic concepts of arrays and then go over some of the programs that are listed in your book, and I want to go over the programs and see how they are working. This is a pretty big chapter, and I have broken it out into several modules, and in this particular modules we will look into how we define our arrays, how we manipulate those arrays, how we can extract values from those arrays, and also do some basic programmings with the values that we have stored in our arrays. So first of all, arrays, in here we are referring to data structures. So far in some of the previous chapters and examples, we have created variables if we wanted to store some values, and then with those stored values we can then apply some kind of a logic to process the values that we have stored. So if I were to store the values of 4 grades, then I would have to define 4 separate variables to store the values. In this chapter, we will learn about arrays, which are data structures where I can store several data items in one defined array. So in this particular array or a data structure, I can store arrays, or I can store values, but those values have to be of the same data type. So I cannot create an array where I can have a mix of integers and doubles and strings and characters mixed in together. In my arrays, I would create an array of a certain data type, and then I would have to store the same data type in that array depending upon how big of an array I have defined. Okay, so we are going to look into the data items of the same type, and then it is easier for us to extract the values out of there. And of course, once I define the array length, I have to stick with the same size. Okay, so let's take a look at what is it that we can use. Now, in Java is a very library-rich language. We can import this Java util package, which would allow us to use a whole lot of methods that are in the array list collection, okay, which would allow us to do or manipulate those arrays if we bring in or import this util package. But again, for this first part, we're just looking into some very basic array structures. Okay, so here is how I define my array, and it is a group of variables called elements, and be careful with these terms because this is something that you might see on your quizzes. And these are the group of variables containing values of the same type. That is what I was just describing earlier. Also, another important fact is that arrays are objects. This is something that you have seen before. So they are always referenced by the reference types. Okay, the elements that we define inside can be either primitive or reference type. So basically, in an array, you can store primitive data, or you can store objects in there, which again would be referenced with the reference type. Okay, the elements index is the number that you would see. So when I define an array, you would see that it's been defined with this square bracket, and there's a value inside that which points to the element of an array. The very first element has an index of 0. And I think it's much easier if I bring this picture up. So basically what I'm saying here is, when you define an array, you are actually defining this memory space where you have a certain size. So in this case, you define a 12 element array. So if you count the number of spaces, there are 12 spaces. However, the very first one is defined as the name of an array, which is C, with a square bracket and the index value of that element, which is 0. So the very first one is my 0. The very last one is 1 less than the size of an array. So if I want to refer to 72, then I'm going to say C of 0, 1, 2, 3. So the third element in the C array holds a value of 72. Now if I come back over here now, so we are saying an index must be a non-negative integer. What they're saying is this 0, 1, and 2, you cannot have a negative value in here because it's referring to this particular space. Now, when we are talking about holding a value, you can always have minus 45 stored in here, but the index value, this is the value that I'm referring to, cannot be a negative number. So let me go back. An indexed array name is an array access expression, okay, can be used from the left side, and then every array object knows its own length and stores it in the length instance variable. Okay, so if I want to find out about the length of this, I can just call in c.length, and that would give me the length of this array, which is going to give me 12, right? So that's your very basic array define. Okay, we talked about array expression, the square brackets, the index of 0, and the highest index in an array is 1 less than the number of elements since it starts with a 0. And array names follow the same conventions as other variables. Alright, so this is how an array would look. So this is how I would create an array. So I would use the keyword new, and then I would specify the element type and the number of elements in the array creation expression. So in this case, I have an int. So this is a array that would only hold int variables. The name of the array is C equals new. That's my keyword. And then I have to again define the data type, and the size is defined right over here. Okay. Now the same thing can also be done in 2 steps. Int C. Right now you just say I defined an array called C, and then I can come back and say C equals new int, and this is where I define my size. All right. So we already talked about the square bracket and already talked about the reference that we have. So when I create an array, each of the element would receive a default value. So if I do not define a value, if I define that array to be an int, it is going to have 0 as your primitive int element. However, if it is defined as a boolean, then false for boolean elements, and if you have an object, then you have null for references. Okay, and this is basically your primitive type arrays, you know, what it's going to store. So of an int array, if I define an array which is an int array, it's going to only hold int variables. So depending upon what array type you're defining, it is going to hold that particular data type. Okay, if you define it as a string, it is going to have string objects. So now let's take a look at the program. So what I did was I had now I'm going to bring in the programs over here. So over here, what I did was I started looking into the individual programs, and I put it in the Eclipse, and I'm using Eclipse in this case. So the first time I'm going to do is let's take a look at our init array. So here is my init array, and don't worry about the console at this point. Okay, so here is my init array, and I would start my array name. This is my class. Now this, I'm calling it init array. Remember, this does not define the array, it's just my class. Okay, I have the public static void main. Now this is where I define my array. Okay, so here is int, which means this is a integer holding array. So this is the name of the array. New is my keyword, and then I also again have to come in and say int 10, this defines my size. Okay. Now system out printf, this is my formatting, so it's %s %8. So it is going to hold a string value. It is going to give 8 spaces, and then it is going to have a %n, which is a new line. Okay, comma, what I want to print is a string. Remember this s over here, so that's index. And then I have this 8s %8, which basically gives some space after I print index, and then it goes and prints this string called value. So this 8 is giving that space before value. So index and then 8 spaces and then value. Okay. And then I write a simple for statement, and inside my for I have a counter. I again am using this method array.length. So counter less than array length, and I have an incrementer, and then in my body of my for statement I just basically write a system out printf, again my formatting %5d %8d %n. So now I'm going to print the counter value and then the value inside my array. Okay, so the way it is going to work is, let me run this program. So here is my 10, and then since I have index, if I count, there's probably going to be 8 spaces over here. If I want to play with it, if I want to make this thing a little smaller, you're going to see this space crimping just a little bit. Okay, now same thing over here. When I go inside my for, this system out printf, if I change this 5d, you see how there's some space over here. If I play with this thing, it might again change a little bit of the spacing, so it's going to move a little bit to this left over here. Now if I run it again and see how this thing moved a little bit, so I can play with this thing, you know, just to see how this is all working. Okay, so I now move this thing, see how this 0 is to the right end, and if I play this again, and now the value moves. But look at what I'm doing over here. This is my counter 0. So in this case, my 0 is less than array length, which is 10. The evaluation is true. So I come in and print this out, counter and array counter. And then with a /n, it moves to the next line. But I'm still not out of the for loop. So I come back, increment my counter. It now becomes 1. 1 is less than 10, yes, and then it comes out, prints this value 1, so that's my next array element, but the value is still 0, and then I keep on going until I reach 9, and as soon as I reach 10, then it stops. Okay, let's look at another program. So this is the same program, but now I'm defining the array just a little differently. I can also define my array where instead of giving a size, I still define the data type, but I don't give a size. Instead, I just put in some values, and the program is smart enough to define an array with the size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and I'm doing the same thing over here. I can play with this value over here, but then I come in and print the value. So now instead of the zeros, these are the values that I'm going to find. So if I do run and compile here, so these are my values: 32, 27, 64, 18, and 95. So these are my values. So this is my index, and these are my values that I have stored. Let's go to the next one. Now in this particular one, I have same program, but now I have defined a few more things. I define a final int, so this is basically a constant. So this array length is a constant, which is a special kind of a variable which should not change at any time, and this is the size of my array length. And then in the next line, I define an array and I call it new int and then array length. So basically, instead of putting in 5 over here, I'm just bringing in the constant that I have used to define the value 5. Okay, and then I come inside, and then my next line I go in for a for statement, again with the counter, array length, and I'm saying array counter. So in every single counter, so I start off with 0, I'm going to place some value. Okay, so my value is, let's take a look. So it's 0. Is 0 less than 5? Yes. Then I'm going to come in array. In this counter I have 0, so in my 0th element I would have 2 plus 4 times counter. So of course if you multiply anything with 0 it becomes 0, so my first value is going to be 2. Okay, let's run this. Now again, I've not finished my evaluation over here, so I'm going to increment my counter. It becomes 1 less than array.length. So now at this point it becomes 1, 2 times 4 times 1. So that's why you get 6. Okay, again go back, becomes 2 less than 5. Yes, 2 plus 4 times 2, 8, and 8 plus 2 is 10, so that's why you get 10. So I guess you get the value, you get the point. Let's look at another one. Now again I am using something very similar. In this case I am basically doing some processing now. So in the first 3 programs I've shown you how you can create your array, extract the values. Now I am actually giving you some values and then doing a little bit of a processing here where I'm going to add these values. Okay, so if I do a sum right now, I have my array defined, and then I did a counter. And again, what I did over here, I wanted to show that I wanted to print out on the screen the values that I have stored. So I basically did a counter less than array length, and system out print line, and this is what I'm printing. Okay, and then I would do another for loop where I would just add these values and then add it to my total. Okay, so I defined a variable called total, so every time I would go through the value I would add them up. So let me run this program. So this statement right here is basically giving me this first set. If I did not have it, if I take this one out, I would not get the first part, and I would immediately get this total of array elements, because now I'm going into my for statement and then going through my array. Every time I encounter one of the values I would store it in total, but then I'm going to go back and check again. I get this value, I'll extract this value 68, add it to my total, extract the value 94, add it to my total, and this is what I'm going to get. But if I open it up, I can actually show the values that I have added. Now, some of the work that you have done before, see, this is a hard-coded value right here. You should be able to define an array and then extract or ask the user to input some of these values inside an array, and then display the values and then do a sum. So then you would not be depending upon some hard-coded values. You can make the program interactive by letting the user input some values, store it in your array. Okay, the very last program that I have is to show you a little more processing utilizing arrays. Again, I'm using a hard-coded value, and this is where I would want you to make it a little more versatile, make it where the user can input some values. So what I'm doing over here, this is an array program where I am doing a bar chart of the grade distribution. So these are my grades that I have recorded over here. Okay, and then I'm saying for int counter equals 0, counter less than array length, counter plus plus. So this value, see, the output bar level is what I'm trying to do. So let me run it first, and maybe it's going to be easier if I show you what I'm doing here. So this statement for int counter 0, okay, look, once you go inside, so at this point my counter is 0 less than array length, so this is the length of my array, which is 10 or 12 numbers. This is true, and then I come in and I said if my counter equals 10, which is not true, so I would skip the if statement, get into my else statement, and in my else statement I have a system out printf 2D dash 0 2D. So basically it's telling you that I have 2 digits and then a little dash and then another 2 digits. So this is my 2 digits, 00-09. And how do I get this? Look into this, comma, counter, which is 0 times 10, which is 0, comma, counter 0 times 10 plus 9. Okay, so basically if I multiply anything with 0, then becomes 0 and then it is 9. So that's why I get 00 and 09. The first time is 00 and 09, and since I have 2D, that's why I get these 2 digits. Okay, the next time, now I'm still within my else. Okay, I finished my else, then I go to my for and I say stars equals zeros. This is my counter. Stars less than array counter. So at this point my array counter is 0, right? So I come in and I say system out println star. Okay, so I don't have any star in here. See, this is 0 over here. So that's why I don't print anything over here. Now I need to go back and say, okay, I need to also, now I have a system out print line, so immediately I come the next line and I go back to my statement. Okay, and my statement over here is I'm going to increment my counter, again come in and say if it is equal to 10, it is not equal to 10, I'm going to jump into my else, then I'm going to say 2D. So now this counter becomes 1, so 1 times 10 becomes 10, comma 1 times 10 plus 9, so that would add up to 10 plus 9, 19. So that's why I get 10 to 19, put a little semicolon. This is where the semicolon is coming from. But then it goes into this for statement where I still, if I look at my counter, it becomes 1. I still do not have any value here. Okay, so that's why I still don't see any value here. Now, if I were to change this thing to maybe 2, then I would immediately get 2 stars printing over here. Let's try it. So I'm going to do this. See how when I ran it, in the second time, since I put 2 in here, I got 2 stars over here. So that's how it goes. And again, system out print line, it moves to the next line and again starts counter. I now become 2 and then again go through the same thing. Now this is going to hit this if statement when I have 10 of these things done. So as soon as I hit 10, I see system out print line 100. So basically this grade, it cannot be more than 100. So it's really up to you as to how you define the range. If I want to go to 110, I can also go from 100 to 110. Now if I do get into 100, then I have to increment this 2D right over here and make it 3D, because now I'm accepting 3 digits. All right, so this is how the program would work. Now let's come back and finish out our PowerPoints here. So this is what I just went over. Okay, so these are the programs that we just did. Hopefully you have a good understanding of the basic manipulation of arrays. Thank you.